Ladies and gentlemen, did you know that every day, every single day of the year, YouTube receives 80 years of content? That means that if you, who watches right now, decides to watch all the video content that YouTube received the day that you're watching this video, you would need 80 years to just consume the content published today. And yet, every time I open my home screen on YouTube, something miraculously happens because there are videos there of channels that I didn't know about and are very interesting and worth sharing with you. For instance, this channel, the Independent Pianist, owned by Cole Anderson, a cool channel, 200 videos, 15,000 subscribers, and on top of the mysteriousness of YouTube, sometimes a video blows up, and of course that's the reason why I got this video on my home screen. And so I clicked on that video, and I have to say it was very entertaining to watch and to listen to. But of course, you all know me, I had some secondary thoughts that I really wanted to share with you. There are a lot of aspects we can touch upon, and disclaimer, I'm going to share my view on the things that are shared here, but in all respect, I mean, we can differ of opinions. Of course, in regard of the WBMP, the whole beat metronome practice, there is not an opinion. It's just an interpretation of a metronomic of the past. There is not something that you can say, okay, but the way you consider these frequencies per minute to be played like a little bit like 20% slower or faster, that doesn't exist. There is nothing more factual in music than a metronomic. That's also one of the hardest parts that we have to overcome. The WBMP, you could say, is one of the more cold, solution-based, I would say, irrefutable interpretations of metronomics of the past, where you just take 2 ticks for 1 beat in the metronomic. That's so simple. And one of the problems is that this concept, this whole beat metronome practice concept, in a way strips the musician of today of this image of the heroes of the past, the Liszts, the Chopins that you know, that image. And I know it myself. I was trained as a pianist as well. It might be surprising to some of you, but I was actually in conservatory practicing 6-7 hours a day to just accomplish that unreachable aspect of what you thought was something that belonged to the Liszts and the Chopins of the 19th century. This huge statute of like virtuosity that we somehow lost. That's of course something that you don't realize. You blame it on yourself. I did, and many people today do. And in a way, the biggest challenge of the WBMP is just that it provides a solution, a direct applicable solution with no room anymore for some fairy telling fantasy is not what I really want to say, but you get my point. It's like you visit, if you're a parent and you visit like a park like Walt Disney, where and you enter like one of these beautifully crafted attractions, like you are surrounded by elves and trolls in a dark cave, and your kids, you know, they come a little closer to you, and you feel their hand pressure a little bit more, and they're a little scared and things like that. And of course, we know it's all not true, but the human mind is a strange thing because we like that. We like to undergo that a little bit. But imagine in such a situation where the beautiful music is played, like, you know, the beautiful music, I mean, this music that really brings you, you get my point. And then suddenly one of the collaborators of that park by accident would turn on the maintenance lights. You know, it actually once happened to us, not by accident, but there was like something wrong with, I don't know, with the machineries of whatever. And then suddenly you look around and everything feels so cold and so like, oh, that was it? Like, really? You see these puppets that just minutes before or seconds before were just like wonderful creatures with light and with like in this forest like whatever world, and then suddenly it's like, oh, that's it. That's a little bit like with the WBMP. We are thinking as musicians for like, okay, how is that? We practice a little bit harder, the mysteries of the Chopin's etudes, and like go back into time. And when we find an edition, like in this video, I'm going to show that in a second. And then suddenly some idiot from Belgium comes like, yeah, but guys, actually it's like this. It's like turning on the lights. Like, yeah, but where is our list now? Where is our Chopin? Well, you tell me that Chopin that I admire so much because of his insane virtuosity didn't exist, and then I have to say yes, that guy, that Frédéric Chopin, that could barely walk upstairs, you know, it's true, by the way. He wasn't able to play his etudes in the way you hear in the Chopin competition. There is no way. And then you say like, yeah, but he intended it like that. Yeah, there is no evidence for that. Chopin played his own etudes in the most remarkable way. So not saying that that's evidence for our WBMP, but you get my point. And so when I watch videos like this, I always am aware of that aspect. I once was at the other side as well, and it's like a very thin line. You just have to accept logic and you are on the other side, but I know how hard it is. So I realize that, and by no stretch of the imagination, my plan is of this video to just apply, can I say, the knowledge that I have built over the last years on this field, on someone who's just exploring a fascinating aspect of musicology. I absolutely do not plan to do that. But on the other hand, this is a very interesting video to take you through and to make some points, some arguments, to reposition slightly the facts that we will hear. And at the end of this video, and it will be a surprise, I can tell you, even if you watch all my videos and you are here for years, you still will be surprised about the twist that I bring at the end of this video around this Etude Opus 10 No. 2 by Chopin. So without further ado, let's dive into what Cole Anderson had to say about this Etude. So obviously this will be partly about the insane difficulties of this piece, which is true. And if you don't know which piece I'm talking about, it's the Opus 10 No. 2. It's this one. So with the chromatic lines in the right hand, this is one of the etudes that people actually today play in the tempo in single beat of Chopin. So this is not a piece that can serve like, okay, but this is really an impossible, these are impossible metronome marks. So this goes, you can also see quarter note 144, and yes, we have, of course, very difficult lines in the upper voice, but it's only allegro. Anyways, I can make a case around this, but let's not do that. But it's this piece that Cole Anderson actually talks about. And then he makes this remark.
Than you might imagine when you first hear it. Getting your weakest fingers, the fourth and fifth fingers, to move this rapidly and with this kind of ease and relaxation is something which pianists over the nearly 2 centuries since Chopin wrote this etude have been struggling with.
Yes, but first point, there is no evidence in the 19th century, and not even the closer you get to Chopin, the less evidence you will find, if you find anything, that pianists from the beginning of these etudes are struggling with this. The etudes by Chopin are today seen as one of the most challenging pieces ever written, but that's not true for the 19th century. If you actually look at the score, again, if I show that to you, it's a very simple etude. The only reason why today we feel, not over 2 centuries, that we think that these etudes are so incredibly difficult is because of the increased speed compared to the original speed that Chopin had in mind. Again, I'm not going to make a case around the Opus 10 No. 2 and the Chopin etudes. Just for you to understand, here is an edition by Hans von Bülow. So a Liszt student and one of the most famous Liszt students, I would say, also in that time seen as one of the, well, most influential pianists and also editors. He made a lot of editions. His Beethoven edition still today is very worth reading because of the comments that he made. Not to take them literally, but you learn always from these editions a little bit about the context in which these people lived. And of course, we'll touch briefly upon also tradition in this video. I will come back to that, but we always have to be careful. Like none of these persons, and actually that's still true today, wanted to reconstruct the historical past uncompromisingly. So when Hans van Bülow says something about Beethoven or other composers, it's Hans van Bülow's opinion. It's the updated opinion. There was always an element like of progression. They took music of the past to a new standard. In addition, however, it's a little bit more complex. But anyways, if we read what Bülow had to say, he says, the editor of this selection of Chopin for pianoforte studies, that's a complete bundle, by the way, however, has no such intentions. And he talked about in the previous alinea about Tausig, who made a selection of Bach's WTC just for the future virtuosi. On the contrary, he wishes to make some of them which, owing to their difficulty, have hitherto remained unpopularized, more accessible, particularly to the amateur, by pointing out the way to their correct study, and thus, on the basis of the technical facility to be acquired through these pieces, to enable even the non-professional to enjoy a more intimate acquaintance with those works of the classical romanticists which, though representing the best and most undying side of his genius, have found till now but a small, though daily increasing circle of admirers for the ladies' Chopin, which for 40 years has blossomed in the pale and sickly race of dilettantism. That's a difficult word in English for me to pronounce. And now you may say like, yeah, but he's just giving an introduction for these pieces for amateurs, and of course the tempo doesn't play a role. Well, to be honest, if you are saying this without ever having played a Chopin etude, they're not easy. Some etudes are a little bit easier than others, but for amateurs who never played Chopin etudes, even in our whole beat tempo, it is not easy. But at the end of this introduction, Hans van Bülow says this: a mastery over such pieces is only to be attained by degrees, and the student will do well to let them rest until he has, through what is here offered to him, obtained a sufficient facility of fingers to enable him to keep this attention almost exclusively fixed on the interpretation of them. Rhythmical elasticity, so-called freedom, can only be based on rhythmical strictness and metronomical captivity. So, yeah, we can debate about what actually Bülow meant with metronomical captivity, but if we look at the score, so it's edition, here's the explanation, not going to stand still too long. You can find the score on IMSLP, by the way. He just gives the metronome marks given by Chopin. So there is no change there. So when he talks about a metronomical captivity, you could say like it's rhythmical strictness. Okay, you can debate about that, but then show me in this edition where the remark is that what he's going to do is actually not for the amateur because of the tempi, and that the amateur or the non-professional should stay away from all of that. And it's not in the introduction, so the assumption that this music can be played by the better amateur is actually, for that time, like later 19th century, still valid. We're coming back on that. First, we go back to the video. At a certain moment in the video, we get a very interesting source that I might have shared with you or not, I forgot. It's an edition made by Arthur Friedheim, student of Rubinstein and Liszt. And it's also an edition in which metronome marks are changed. And so it's very interesting to see how they are changed, how we can explain that. And of course, when someone changes metronome marks, it's very important to know where you come from. And there we come to this element of like looking at the same facts, but from a little bit of a different perspective with huge consequences. So let's first listen to what Cole had to say about this.
This piece, I also have been looking at various editions, and I found a rather interesting one by Arthur Friedheim. For those of you who don't know, Arthur Friedheim was one of Liszt's pupils, and actually a pretty prominent one, who performed a great deal, and who also prepared a lot of editions of Liszt's works and also other composers' works. And so I found this edition of Arthur Friedheim of all the Chopin etudes. And one thing that was very interesting to me was actually that Friedheim gives metronome markings, his own metronome markings, which are quite a bit slower generally than Chopin's. This is just another example, if any was needed, of how the tradition of tempi in Liszt's school was probably actually on the slower end of things, in keeping with Wagner's ideas about tempi, and the evidence of certain of Liszt's transcriptions, which almost require the performer to take a slightly more stately tempo in order to make everything actually sound.
For those of you who are around this channel and our research and our work for a longer time, you can answer this question by yourself right now. Leave me in the comments if you can. It's very interesting, though, to see what Cole said here. First, start with the last part, like the transcriptions by Liszt. He will talk about the Mozart transcription of the Requiem, but it's the general stand on this that also if you go to the Liszt transcriptions by Beethoven symphonies, we have here the Czerny transcription, four hands of the Beethoven symphonies. But of course, the Liszt transcriptions are not playable when you want to play them in the tempi that are given by Beethoven for the original works, or by Mozart. Of course, Mozart didn't give metronome marks, but we have some standard way of playing them today. And so if you want to play them in that tempo, well, then these transcriptions are impossible. In fact, I made recently a video of Katsaris' performance of the Liszt transcriptions of Beethoven symphonies, in which actually he said, like, I practiced over 10 years to come to the point where I could record them. And if we then check the tempi, is sometimes of oftentimes 20-30% slower, supposedly slower, compared to the original metronome markings. And so the argument we hear here is an argument that you hear often, that the difficulties of these pieces actually is a proof for the fact that the transcribers, in this case Liszt, didn't want you to achieve the tempo marking given by Beethoven. But, you know, you can think about like, okay, but why does Karl Czerny or Franz Liszt give the metronome mark, the original authentic metronome mark by Beethoven, in his transcription? It's very weird, right? If you don't want people, or if you transcribe the piece in a way that you don't want people to play the piece in the tempo given by the original author, why do you not make a remark about that? And if you then again look into the 19th century, you have other great transcribers, people who made like great transcription by virtuoso pianists. There is nothing that suggests that we should play transcriptions considerably slower compared to the original metronome marking. And on the contrary, the art of transcribing is to come as close as possible to the orchestral effect. And of course, the orchestral effect is, for a big part, depending on the tempo that this piece is played in, being the metronome mark. And no, I'm not going to make this case here again, in which Beethoven, I mean, we have so much evidence that Beethoven wanted you to play his music in the tempi that he indicated, especially for his symphonies. And so when Liszt transcribes them, or Czerny transcribes them, of course you play them in the tempo. But the fact that it's not possible should not lead you to the conclusion that the transcriptions were not supposed to be played in the original tempo. They should lead you to the question, like, why is it not possible that we today can play these transcriptions in the original tempo? Maybe the original tempo was much slower than what we think. And of course, our metronome practice, the WBMP, comes in to great help. Again, it's like a direct cold solution, like you just halve the metronome mark, which, by the way, is not halving the performance practice of today, but because rarely you know that these tempi are met. But when you halve the metronome mark, then this becomes playable, and the Liszt transcriptions also. And then you also understand what Liszt meant in 1863 when he wrote to Breitkopf and Hertel, his publisher. The target of these transcriptions, the difficulty level, so to say, for him, for Liszt, was the first-year conservatory student, to enable him to play these transcriptions at sight. So they were supposed to be sight readable. And if you read something like that from the perspective of today, with all the metronome marks that we interpret in single beat, like the modern way of reading, then of course it doesn't make any sense. But you shouldn't skip that. That should like be a roadblock, like Liszt wrote that to his publisher. And you can say like, yeah, but Liszt was so much better as a pianist as we today. And then go and read what his students said later. I made a video about Maurice Rosenthal, who said in 1914 or 1924, I leave that in the middle, doesn't matter, that when Liszt would come back to his time, 1924, He would be surprised about the speed in which he played and other musicians played his works in, and that students of Liszt would have to practice at least 4 times as much in order to be able to enter conservatories in 1924. And I invite you to listen to the acoustical recordings of people of that generation made a little bit later. Like compare the Paderewski pianola recordings with the acoustical recordings, and you will be surprised. The acoustical recordings are sometimes technically just not okay to the standards of today. And so when we travel 100 years back to the Paderewskis and those people, and then go back 50 years, and those people 100 years ago said like, but these students would not be able to enter a conservatory unless they practice 4 times as much, then all of that together must make you think like, okay, but transcriptions, we cannot play them in the indicated tempi. So probably it's not meant like that. Yes, it's meant like that. And how do you solve it? That not by playing faster and faster and practice more and more, because you will never, ever achieve something technically more impressive, more elaborate, more challenging than what Katsaris did. It's like unbelievable what this guy did. It's like mind-blowing. If you listen to his playing, you cannot imagine that this music is supposed to be played faster. But of course, the truth obviously is to the other direction. Therefore, what I said, we look at the same evidence, the same facts, we just change a little bit of direction, see what happens. What happened if we read that Metronomic differently? Okay, then everything is solved, because then we can play the transcription, and then we can play all these transcriptions. I'm not saying all of the Liszt transcriptions that are available then for everyone, but the Liszt Beethoven transcriptions for a normal professional pianist, yes, that's doable. But then if we come to Friedheim, and the argument Cole made was basically like, okay, we see in that edition that he slowed down the metronomics considerably, which is true. I have the edition here, and it's no surprise. I mean, it's like the first etude that is given in 144, Chopin originally 176, and then if you go to scroll down to the second etude, it's 126. Chopin marks that piece with 144. And the argument made here is, again, we look at the same evidence, we just have a little bit of a different perspective, and everything changes. So the argument made in the video is, okay, this is a proof of how the late Liszt school actually was influenced by the Wagner tradition, or the Wagner influence, who wanted to slow down everything. Now, to start with, there is no evidence that Wagner slowed down tempi. On the contrary, he was actually being criticized for taking fast movements faster than necessary, and then slower movements slower than necessary. Of course, oftentimes what happens in literature is when you read about Wagner, you hear only the second part, like that he takes slower movements even more slow. So the extremities of tempi, that was something that more people than just Wagner was, like everybody in the 19th century was doing that. So more to the extremes. We have other people commenting on that trend in the 19th century. But it's absolutely not true that Wagner in general took these classical music, these Beethoven tempi much slower compared to the original intention of the composer. There is no evidence for that. It's been said so often that someone like Cole, I cannot blame him for that, actually starts to believe that. Therefore, when you make a claim, musicologists, are you listening? You should, or conductors. I made a video on that of Parvo Jarvi. Check it out on the channel. It was a few years back, where he accused Wagner actually of doing that, and in fact explained the high Beethoven metronomics as to that Beethoven really wasn't serious about it, but he was anticipating, was foreseeing in the future that someone like Wagner, of course, Beethoven didn't know who Wagner was gonna be, that someone like him would rise and then would take tempi so much slower that he was giving some counterweight to that future trend by giving too rapid metronomics. Well, when I hear, and Parvo Jarvi I criticized a lot because it was a BBC documentary, and also I criticized in that video the one who interviewed him, but it's because why didn't she ask, like, did you have any troubles with these metronomics? There was none of that. So we just accept that. And of course, we need to be very hard of these conductors because they are in an authoritative position. When they say something, People like Cole just believe that, but there is no evidence for that. It's the biggest nonsense that you can hear. There is no trend in the 19th century, and that's still not today. Just look around, guys. The tempi that we take now are faster than the tempi we took 30 years ago, are faster than the tempi we took 30 years before. Don't go to the pianola recordings because we have absolute evidence that many of those are sped up. Anyways, just saying, the evidence on the contrary that tempi in the 19th century sped up is overwhelming. And what else would you expect in a time where everything is an expansion? But then, of course, Friedheim, he gave tempi, Chopin tempi, that are slower. But is this a tradition of Chopin? And that's, of course, one of the key answers, the key questions that we need to answer. And the beginning of his introduction, it's something that I don't know if Cole read that, but it's really interesting. Again, let's just dive into this. So Friedheim says, in every age, there have been individuals who disputed the value of old tradition. It's cool to hear someone. It's 1916, this edition, but Friedheim was a Liszt student, a late Liszt student, also Rubinstein. I mean, it's a very late Liszt Rubinstein tradition, but he published this in 1916. So he says, in every age, there have been individuals who disputed the value of old traditions. Well, I would say that happens in all times, in all ages, even today. But anyways, if they did not roundly deny it, this first sentence is really cool, because what he actually says is, there are so many people, he says individuals, he's going to criticize Mikuli, one of the most important Chopin students, but he says like, there are people that roundly deny tradition to exist. But that's so true. Tradition is something that people go, for instance, to these early 20th century recordings, whether it is pianola or it is like, and they say like, yeah, that's, if we listen to Cortot, that's how Chopin played, because there was a student of a student of a student. And then my question is like, do you still play like Cortot? Do you still play like these early pianola recordings with a lot of rubato? Do you still play like that? No. But so in spite of the fact that we today say like, that's the Chopin tradition that we hear like of these recordings like made 100 years ago, we don't do it, but we still want to play like Chopin. Yeah, but if you think that's the Chopin tradition, why don't you play it like, then why don't you play like that? In spite of having the recordings. So imagine that someone in 1930 made a recording of which we say like, that's how Chopin supposedly played. He never heard Chopin playing. So where's the tradition? And if you go and analyze that time, the only thing you can actually come up with as a conclusion is that what you hear there is a tradition of 1930. When you hear a recording of 1940, that's a tradition of 1940. There was no musician going back in time and saying, now I'm going to play like Chopin played, in spite of the fact I've never heard them. Yeah, there was an awareness, but there was no desire. When they talked about tradition, they actually talked about old music taken to a new level. The new level was a new standard, and they were fine with that, as we are still fine with that as well. That's also partly the reason why the WBMP is like not just smoothly entering all the performances in spite of the logic. It's because we don't actually care about that. We want our interpretation, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, what we are doing here is more out of touch with our time than when you just speed the music a little bit faster, a little bit more up. Because that is really the evolution of time. What we are doing en masse, so what the majority of musicians and musicologists actually try to support, and that's another game. Musicologists should be like more factually based, but in fact, what I wanted to say is like this tradition, this like still ever ongoing speeding up of tempi is just 19th century and 18th century. It was always part of humanity. Looking back into history and say like, now I get rid of what I really think, feel, my taste, my developed taste, what I've learned in conservatory, and I go back 200 years and I apply that. That's really new. This is maybe the most revolutionary thing of the entire project. It's like just uncompromisingly go back in time and say, we don't care, we make it work. And to be honest, it was the most joyful experience of my life. There is a reward, but just back to Friedheim. I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. Well, maybe not, but it's such a fascinating topic. And again, the fascinating thing is that we just change a little bit and we have such a different view. And again, at the end of this video, don't go away if you're still here. Thank you. for being here. It really means a lot to me. So, and you will be rewarded for sticking till the end of this video. But let's continue. So, Friedheim says, now hardly one case in 1,000 is better adapted to lend countenance to such views than Chopin's edition of Carl Miccoli. After the very rational, quietly objective preface, one would expect a trustworthy, well-informed guide through blessed and unblessed realms of enchantment, instead of which one usually finds himself confronted, so to speak, by a hedge of stubborn, thorny fingerings and shapelessly twisted, truncated expression and tempo marks. By the way, these tempo marks, Friedheim didn't know that, but they are Chopin's, behind which a naughty rogue seemed to be calling out mockingly at the trustful beginner, come along, keep on trying, you'll never get through. By the way, that's still valid today. So Friedheim is actually taking the metronome marks, of which he apparently doesn't know they stem from Chopin. He's going to make a remark later on in the text, like supposedly there are Chopin markings, also the pedal markings, really? Yes. And Chopin was like very hard for his publishers. He wanted to have it really precise. Anyways, what he says is like, come on, you really think we can play that? And it's a very interesting case. Remember, we made a video about the magazine, the Etude, recently. I will try to link the video below, and if I forget, like if you find it, link it in the comments below, because it's interesting watching. It's the same thing. 1870s, 1880s, people did seem like confused with the Chopin markings. They must have been aware of this whole beat, this double reading standard, but not really into it so much that they applied it to music that by their standards of that time already was sped up so much. I'm going to touch upon that in a second, because the twist comes at the end, but you will get another source that is really cool. So, in fact, when you read this introduction, and here he said, and the crowning joke is that all of this is supposed to be by the composer himself here. It's unbelievable because it was by the composer himself. And now granted, Miccoli does change a few fingerings. I'm not sure about the pedal markings, but if you play from the Miccoli edition, you should check also the first prints. But in general, Miccoli is not changing that much. Bowing and things like that, and fingerings, wherever Chopin's fingerings are present, he respected them. On the contrary, this edition by Friedheim, he changes everything. But the point is, and that's also the point what Cole made, like here's a guy that connected to the tradition. Is also what Friedheim thought. He said, like, this is what I've learned from Liszt. And the question now is, what is the closest tradition to Chopin, Miccoli or Friedheim? What Friedheim heard was how Chopin was generally played late 19th century. And now you can say, like, but he had lessons from Liszt and Rubinstein. Now, Rubinstein, it's an all other story. But Liszt, at the end of his life, okay, didn't he then teach this WBMP of yours? I mean, that's a proof. If Friedheim says that these are my tempi, then Liszt must have just agreed with them. And I would say yes. Even Liszt, it's a difference in knowing how the past was, and also maybe even for himself play like that. We have sources, made videos about that, how Liszt played, witnesses that, like Charles-Marie Widor, who said, like, it's unbelievable how much slower he plays music than we are used to, like at the end of his life. But that doesn't mean that Liszt was stopping evolution. So tradition again was evolved tradition. And so the metronome marks you see here from Friedheim are single beat. At 1916, talked about that more than once. There is a transition at the end of the 19th century where you have a more rapid transition from whole beat to single beat. 1916 is right in the middle of the transition. We have cool stories. Again, Max Reger, Karl Straube, we have videos there on the channel, research done by my colleague Marcel Punt. It's mind-blowing, both metronomizations next to each other, and nobody actually saw something wrong. So Friedheim is single beat, and how do I know? Just by going to the third etude. Also there I made some videos. People say, like, yeah, Chopin gives 100 for the 8th note. If I scroll down here, you will see 8th note 100, Friedheim, 8th note 69. So that's not half of Chopin. So you could say, hey, it's not playing, and it's not a whole beat Metronomic, but because that would have been 8th note 50, right? Yes, but of course, again, people were speeding music up. So 1916, what Friedheim claims to be the Chopin tradition is what I believe the late Liszt, not tradition, it's like how people in those days, end of the 19th century, played. We do not come from 176, which is Chopin original tempo. Show you again here. We come from, if you wish, like quarter note, or 8th note 176, not quarter note. So quarter note 88, that was Chopin's original tempo. And now look at this, quarter note 144, it's almost single beat, but not yet. If I add to that another source, which is an edition by Hermann Scholz, a Brahms friend, so also late, like second half of the 19th century. This is a edition by Peters later. See, for instance, here, first etude. Tempo quarter note 104. Again, Friedman 144, Chopin 176. So does that mean that this guy, Hermann Scholz, also didn't agree with the faster Chopin mark, or did he just give a Metronomic as was just currently people were practicing or playing this piece in his time? And there is an asterisk here in this edition, and that's very interesting. And the asterisk actually says, here it's a little bit bigger, the figures of metronome follow the tradition of the great Polish Chopin players. We would say, if we would have recordings of people playing this music in 1870, that's how Chopin played. No, we would hear this piece played in 104. There's a single beat marking. And if you compare that to Chopin, it's not that Chopin played faster, Chopin played slower, but not so much. 88 to 104 is an increase like a generation. You go to Friedman, you add another generation. Today, this piece, some people can play it in 176, and we're trying to play it even faster. So long story short, again, this is more a podcast than a YouTube video. Friedheim wrongfully thought that he connected to the Chopin tradition, which of course he didn't know firsthand, and that he had to criticize Mikuli for his insane metronomics. But the metronomics given by Mikuli were actually Chopin's metronomics. He didn't know that. The interesting thing is also that he criticized the metronomics being completely and utter nonsense. He doesn't write it like that, but he is using pretty strong wordings. Like, come, it's a joke. You really think that you're supposed to play that? So practice more and more and more and more for the unreachable, for the unreachable. He literally says that, almost. And so we learn just by switching a little bit that what we see in Friedheim is not the real Chopin tradition at the end of the 19th century. In a way it is, but it is the updated Chopin tradition. We didn't come from 176, we came from 88. And if you say like, but that is shocking because 88 quarter note for the first etude, I can play that with the fingers in my nose, well then try it. I guarantee you that it's not easy, it's not for everyone. And again, Chopin is not the hard, he didn't write the hardest etudes of all. This is an updated Kramer. And by the way, this is of course clearly an interpretation of the WTC one, the first prelude. I mean, we made videos on that. But then towards the end of the video, Cole made a very interesting remark on the performance by Valentina Lisitsa. We're gonna listen, I'm gonna analyze that, and then that will lead us directly to that mind-blowing twist that I will give you at the end of this video, and I promised at the beginning actually, some 25 hours ago.
Doing a little bit of a cheat, such as Valentina Lisitsa actually. Valentina Lisitsa is just one example of this, not to denigrate her performances or anything like that, but if you look at her video of this etude, you can actually see that in many places she's not playing the inner note of this chord in the right hand. So her index finger is just kind of flying up and just kind of being free. It's actually quite a clever facilitation to leave that note out sometimes. I think sometimes she does play the full chord, sometimes she doesn't. And you can hear other pianists who also do that, which makes it even more impressive, actually. There are some pianists who play it super, super fast, like Backhaus, and actually play all the notes, and it's quite impressive.
So before we take a listen to Lisitsa, the remark on Backhaus plays in a tempo by 176. I can share so much faster compared to the original metronome marking by Chopin in single beat even. Just let's listen to Backhaus for a few seconds. That's really impressive. But this guy recorded the Opus 10 and the Opus 25, and I think also the 3 other etudes by Chopin in 2 days. If I hear in 1928, if I hear the quality of the recording, I don't know the history of the recording. I'll try to look it up, but there is no information that I could find online. Is this an acoustical recording? 1928 would be very, very, very early. With the electrical recordings, up to then, people were using like these huge horns. There were just acoustical recordings with no electricity, but we have very poor sound quality. But the early electric recordings were also not that great, while this recording captures all frequencies. And so I don't know if you know the history of this recording, leave it in the comment section. But if this happened to be a pianola recording, which listening to the sound quality, it's like, it could be, then you can be very sure that it's sped up. 1928 with this purity, with like no mistakes, this like easiness in going into a tempo like 176, even Lisitsa plays it in 144, 152-ish. It's incredible. I have my doubts, but that's not so important. Let's take a look at Lisitsa's performance, and then I'm going to show you something. So again, Backhaus. I don't know. But Lisitsa is pretty impressive. I mean, people criticize her often, but I wonder why. Her technique is like unbelievable. The souplesse she has. By the way, also the remark that Cole made in the video, like, yeah, if you want to go faster, you need actually lighter pianos. That's of course that's the argument you hear oftentimes. I cannot do it on my Steinway, but on an original player you can. Well, good luck. Good luck with that. If you go back to Lisitsa, see how much she leans into the key. I mean by that, she leans into the key in a way that, you know, these instruments have double escapement. The player of Chopin didn't have that. And if you go back for this etude, it's written for the Viennese piano. Good luck with that. If you even have your finger rest on the key too much, so prepare the note a little bit too early, then you don't have sound at all. So that saying that these pianos, because they played lighter, make this everything like so much easier, that's like a tricky statement. But the criticism that Cole Anderson gave to Lisitsa was that she actually did some tricky things, like she was cheating a little bit actually by or leaving out notes in the left hand. Again, if you look at the score, it's not easy. You have chromatic lines in the right hand, 16th notes here in the left hand, not in the left hand and the right hand also, that you need to play with your index and with your thumb. And what the criticism that we heard is like Lisitsa or makes these notes very, very short, or she leaves some notes out. Okay, but what to say about this? If you think this etude was already difficult, and now I'm going to explain my title that I gave to my video, being the most incredible performance, is not incredible at all. This is the manuscript, or it's a preserved manuscript of Chopin of this piece. And you may not see it very well, but this is actually the edition. And I don't hear many people speak about that. So the cheating part is completely eliminated here. You have quarter notes, quarter note, not everywhere. Chopin is also giving 16th notes. So he is very well aware of what he's doing. It's not just like one of these pre-versions of a piece that he's going to develop later. And so what to do about this? Good luck playing this in the tempo by Backhaus or Lisitsa or even Friedheim. It won't work. You cannot play that. You have to keep your index and thumb all the way till the next note. And by the way, just as a side note, you know I'm a tempo nerd. How many times did you hear people say like, if you have cut time, it's much faster compared to normal time, to common time. So you see that the edition, in the edition Chopin, changed cut time into common time. But look at the tempo, 144 quarter note. And if you go back, half note 69. The common time is actually faster compared to the cut time. And so I see sometimes people in the comment section like, yeah, but cut time and common time, there is no difference of what, yeah, there is in 16th note notations, there is not so much difference in that time. So not going to make this video into like explaining all of that. That will be for another time. And if you really want to know more about that, I'm preparing now a course on the Beethoven symphonies, the notation there, and to understand, to help you read the score also with the help of the Metronomics. There will be a very extensive premium course that will be part of the full Beethoven experience, where we also will offer that to you as a standalone course. There you will hear everything about all of that. So this was a long video. I'm surprised. I'm also surprised that I found so many sideways that I didn't make notes about, you know. It was just like, this is of course a thing that I'm doing day in, day out. And again, this, don't consider this to be a criticism of any sort to the work of Cole Anderson. I mean, it's cool. It's no problem. It shouldn't be also a problem to just comment on that and to just give my take on that. And I think it will be hopefully taken well if Cole sees this video. I don't know. Leave it in the comment section. I would appreciate that, because we need to talk about that. And at the end, it comes down to what we want with music and what we want in this reconstructing or reconstructive effort. I know that many musicians, maybe all musicians, not all musicians, and even not all musicians that I know, but many musicians wake up in the morning with a very genuine and honest wish to practice music, to play music, to add also personality, own personality into that. It's something that still, you know, we are in the pinnacle of the age of enlightenment. The spotlights are on the individuals, and with social media, I would say maybe sometimes even a little bit too much, but that's another discussion. And so I get it. Like the desire to come as close to the authentic, original intention of the composer is mixed with like, but I'm doing honor to the composer by taking his music and adding a little bit of my own layers to that, my own taste to that. The question is if that would be appreciated so much by Beethoven and Chopin. I'm not so sure, but there's nothing wrong with that. But at the end, we have to come to terms with the question like, okay, do we want to hear that music once in our life, closer to how we know for a fact, because there is no challenge to the WBMP. Absolutely not. If you challenge that, please don't think you're challenging that in the comment section of this video. You challenge that by opening a piano and playing. And then you will see for yourself, it's basically impossible. Many of these metronomics, just take the Opus 299. I know people say, oh, it's all been done on the internet and there are videos there. Yeah, okay. Good luck with doing that live. Not hiding behind the score, where, of course, with one just turn of the knob in Audacity, you have the tempo you want. I mean, we should be a little smarter than that. But the question is, what do we want? And I think in the future, there will be two ways of playing music. It's two ways of, I would say, historical reconstruction is just what we're doing now. What people generally doing now, as I said in this video, it's a kind of historical continuation or continuation of a historically grown situation. We don't go back in time, but then just accept that. We don't know if Liszt would come to Rosenthal's time, to life, and shake hands in 1924 with Rosenthal. How would he react? He might just have said like, that's cool, absolutely. And he comes now to our time and he hears Valentina Lisitsa play or other people play. So like, oh, you play that Chopin etude so fast that we couldn't even dream about. Maybe it would be like so enthusiastic, but that doesn't mean that the original Chopin actually meant this music to be played differently. I'm not so sure that would count for Beethoven. We have enough remarks by Beethoven that he wants to stick to his tempo, like really on the beat. And then you have the other way, like really going back to that and say, okay, we apply that. There is no other solution. And the result of it is mind-blowing. It's just a complete different listening experience. It is really a different listening experience. Just to wrap this video up, it's going over an hour now on recording. I will have to cut it down a little bit. So these long videos also require some work from me. I'm always like angry at myself that I just keep babbling, but I mean, I like interacting with you guys. It's one of the privileges I have. I'm blessed with such an audience. And if you're still here, let me know in the comments. I really want to know. If you're still here, mark the time and say, Wim, I'm here. I will be thankful. I will be reading that. I will give you a little heart, for your comment. I really appreciate that. But just a final point, Alberto, my partner here of the forehand transcriptions of Czerny Beethoven, is now in the midst of recording complete Beethoven works. It's not only the sonatas, all the variations. Guys, they are mind-blowing. Some of them we know, but a majority of them, I promise you, you'll never have heard of them, and it's a pity. But when you listen to them, and of course, when you will hear later the variations, everybody will say that's a normal tempo because we don't know the music, and so that tempo suddenly, that the whole beat tempo is normal because we don't have a projection of the music. We have to just sit and wait, and then guess what? That's a humanly possible tempo also to listen to. But the variations require, some of the variations seems to be very simple, and Beethoven is Beethoven, even for the younger variations. He still finds a way to just keep you listening. But you have to then imagine, like, okay, we're sitting around the piano with 5-6 people, and then we play this music, and that's enough. That's what we need. That's like, we don't need more. And then you go to a sonata. We had the experience yesterday. Alberto finished the 6th CD. Recording the sonata that he recorded the opus 10 number 2, that's the F major. But after hearing the Salieri variations, which are, by the way, mind-blowing, it's unbelievable, then the first bars of that sonata, you think like, oh, that's difficult music. But then you think like, okay, but it's a sonata. It's another book. It's not even another chapter in Beethoven's works. It's just another audience, maybe even. But once you know that, you just adjust and say, oh, it's cool. It's unbelievable. Same with the symphonies. Symphonies have everything, of course. So there's the same thing with going back in time and playing Chopin in another way. It just takes a little bit of mental preparation. That's all. It just takes you 2 seconds, nothing more. And then I promise you, a universe opens. But there's nothing wrong with playing the way we play today. And in a way, it's historically justified if you would need that. Okay, guys. Thanks for sticking around so long. Thanks for being here. Thank you for your attention. Leave all your thoughts and comments and thoughts and ideas in the comment box. I'll be maybe not answering them, but I take my time sometimes to read them. That was it. That's all I've got for you today. Thanks for watching. We see each other soon again. Bye.